This episode of the Commercial Real Estate Investor Podcast is brought to you by Hamilton, a value-add investment and development firm in Nashville, Tennessee, focused on bringing passive real estate investment opportunities directly to your inbox. Visit www.investwithhamilton.com/invest to sign up for upcoming investment opportunities. Welcome back to the Commercial Real Estate Investor Podcast. I'm your host, Tyler Cobble, and we are bringing you, I believe, the final episode for 2021. What a crazy year it's been. Really excited to get this show on the road. I'm sitting across from the Jeremy Young at Tootsie Lou's Tacos. Can't tell you guys how excited I am for this group to be opening up. They've got a really cool origin story. He and his partners actually moved here from Austin to start this concept here in Nashville. And today we're going to be talking more about micro units. Y'all know my concept, The Wash. We had a very similar conversation with Chad Newton at Eastside Banh Mi, Eastside Pho about his experience with micro units. So we're going to do the same with Jeremy today and talk about the restaurant industry. So Jeremy, it was a very brief introduction, but tell us a little bit about yourself and your background in restaurants.
Sure, yeah. Well, thanks for having me on here. I've been cooking for more time in my adult life than I have not been cooking. Started in California and kind of cooked my way up through the ranks of some more fine dining restaurants. And before moving out to Austin, and came out to Austin to go to culinary school and check that box on my resume. And then, just cooked my way through a lot of restaurants in Austin, Texas. Kind of got away from fine dining and got into a great hospitality group out there, Tootsie. They have, I think, 8 restaurants now and a couple bar concepts. And so I had the great privilege of kind of working my way up into kitchen leadership there, and then kind of breaking out into more upper management duties in that company. And that was a hugely formative part of my career, because I, for the first time, got the chance to actually manage, costs and look at a P&L and, dig into all the bones of the business, which really helped give me a pretty solid skill set, not just with cooking, but with leading people and with opening businesses and opening restaurants. So worked for Tootsie in Austin, and then COVID hit. And when COVID hit, that kind of just rattled a lot of the status quo that existed in the restaurant industry. Everybody was pivoting, and everybody was trying not to lose their businesses and still trying to remain profitable and successful. And, I thought it was time for a change, and my wife, Megan, agreed with me. And our chef partner, Drew, who's kind of the third part of Tootsie Lou's, was on board. And so we decided to kind of piece together a concept that would make sense for COVID times, make sense for our interests. And we started hunting around for a city to come to that we felt like we could thrive in, and that ended up being Nashville.
Yeah, Nashville has become such a food scene. It's been really fun for me to watch. I tell the story all the time about when I was in high school, and there was a line around the block when Chipotle opened, because that was like the coolest thing that had ever opened up in Nashville. And now we have all of these chef-driven concepts and unique ventures that I don't think Nashville has ever experienced before. It's fun watching this wave of all of y'all coming in and doing that. What is Tootsie Lou Tacos?
So Tootsie Lou's Tacos is, pure and simple. It's just an expression of our fascination and our love for Mexican flavors. And it's been a long love affair in my life, and Megan's life, and Drew's life. Megan, my wife Megan, is born and raised in Texas, and I'm come from California. So it's like when you grow up in like a state that borders on Mexico,
you have to have tacos.
The cuisine is everywhere, the culture is everywhere. It's so immersive. It's the go-to late night food. It's the go-to drunk food. It's the go-to cheap food. And so we were very familiar with all these flavors, but had never really cooked it professionally, which seemed kind of strange at a certain point. Back in late 2019, early 2020 is when, the restaurants that I was working at, that Drew was working at, they started to shutter. They started to furlough people because of COVID. And we were there at our house all of a sudden with all this time off to like work and develop on a concept. and all we really wanted to cook were tacos. It was just the natural thing that came to us. And at a certain point, it's like, man, maybe we should give this a try as an actual business. So, with that in mind, we kind of developed this model, and it kind of stems from our fine dining background a bit, where it's very ingredient driven, trying to keep things relatively focused on the cuisine of like Mexico City. And so we're trying to stay away from like fusion, and we're trying to stay away from the Tex-Mex side of things, and really do kind of our best impression of authentic Mexican food through our culinary lens.
Yeah.
So that's essentially the concept. We want it to be approachable. We want it to be something that's easily accessible to everybody in the neighborhood, and obviously push forward the best flavors that we can.
Yeah. I mean, you guys are doing a phenomenal job of it. The first time that I ever, I guess tasted y'all's tacos was at the Gifford's Bacon pop-up.
Yeah.
And
First one.
y'all had obviously collaborated with Gifford's on a taco. And man, I still dream of that taco.
It was a good one.
It was so good.
Yeah, we were so fortunate to meet Nathan Gifford, and he's such a, that's a greater part of the Nashville restaurant community, is that there's all these ambassadors that live here in Nashville that are just open arms, welcoming to any newcomers. And I think that's like a wonderful feature of this city that speaks volumes about your food scene. It's like, you can't really, in my opinion, you can't really build a great food scene by excluding people. You know, it's kind of like the more the merrier, get in here, and then you let quality be the guiding light from there on out. So.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about that a little bit before we went live, just about how, the restaurant industry in most cities is often very cutthroat. In Nashville, it's almost the exact opposite. I mean, everybody wants to help each other. They're so welcoming and giving of their time. And it is truly a community instead of everybody operating on their own island.
Yeah.
I mean, was that a big shock to you when you moved to Nashville?
It was. It remains a big shock to me. It's something that, half of it was a determining factor as to why we came out here. Because I had been in Nashville before, and to do some food events and work some festivals and things like that. And that was kind of my initial introduction, was coming out to cook with Sarah Gavigan of Otaku Ramen.
Oh, cool.
She invited us out from Texas to do an event with her, and was such an amazing hostess, and took us around and showed us, Husk and Peg Leg and, all of these Dinos, all these amazing institutions in Nashville. And so I already kind of knew that the scene was different here. It was a little more welcoming. It was a little more warm. But that was definitely, looking at Nashville from an Austin point of view or a California point of view, that's definitely a sign that stood out to us is, they want food here. They want new things. They're not trying to, push people down so that they can float up. It was a little less competitive here. And I think that was a huge part of why we chose this city, because it's so funny to me, having cooked in LA and San Francisco and Austin, and, Drew did a lot of time in Chicago at Michelin restaurants, and it's always so, just you versus them.
Oh, yeah.
Kind of adversarial even, it's about who it's about, everything's kind of perceived as a threat initially, where it's like, if there's a new chef that comes to town and tries to open a concept, everybody's like, what if it's better than mine? I don't necessarily want to help that person out. And so we were just so tired of that culture. And also it's kind of seeing in other cities how that really kind of waters down the culture.
Right.
Has interesting food and brave food is not really successful in those environments, because you have to compete against all these people that don't want you to succeed. But when you have neighbors that are really rooting for you, you're actually able to succeed, and then you're able to turn around and help them out and promote their business and do collaborations and takeovers and all this fun stuff that really makes a culinary scene special,
Do you think it's because the more creative food scene in Nashville is relatively young? I mean, compared to,
I think so.
Chicago and LA and some of these cities where, they've had world-renowned restaurants for decades. But Nashville, had only a handful up until really, I would say, this last economic cycle. You know, 2010 on is when a lot of this has really started to pick up. Do you think that has anything to do with it?
I think it's certainly age. I think age of an environment definitely is a huge factor. It's not the only factor, and I think that a major contributing factor that a lot of people ignore is the community, the guests themselves, like whoever's actually going out and eating. Not so much the restaurateurs, the owners, the chefs, but more the people that are coming and dining. If they're excited about new things and they're willing to try something new with an open mind because they are excited for just an influx of something different, that's kind of the spark that will carry a scene to maturity, rather than it being like a bubble that just is big for a second, then it pops and goes away. It's kind of the enthusiasm for the culture and the cuisine that keeps it going. And those are definitely, I feel like, for me, I came to a place where I was not even looking for the fully developed culinary scene anymore. I was looking for like the signs of life that it was going to happen. And I think that's a lot of my attraction to Nashville, a lot of Tootsie Lou's attraction to Nashville was coming here and seeing, oh, there's pop-ups on every corner. There's takeovers happening at this bar. A lot of these restaurants that people told us were the best in town were only a few years old. They weren't these like ancient institutions, and those are all positive symptoms of future success, So it was rather than going to a place that's already established, it's like, okay, we could go to New York, go to Chicago, try to compete against all these like titans that are already there. Rather than doing that, it became much more appealing to us to go and be on the ground floor of something that we knew was going to be great in the future.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of where we're at in the moment in Nashville with the restaurant scene. It's like good things have already happened, but really great things are coming.
Yeah, it's really fun to watch. I mean, I grew up in Nashville, and again, it was just so sleepy. You know, we didn't have this food scene like we have now, and I never thought twice about it until we had it because I just grew up without it. But it's fascinating to me to see the caliber of concept that is now being delivered in Nashville. I feel like, you look at what Chad and Gracie are doing, what y'all are doing, honestly, there's a huge immigrant population now in Nashville that is starting to do some really incredible concepts. And, we're talking about stuff that Nashville's never really seen before, right? Like at the Wash, we've got Peruvian and Cuban. And historically, Nashville hasn't had a whole lot of those concepts around town. It's really cool, man. I'm excited for you guys to really be a part of that.
Yeah, so are we. I mean, it's great to be here, and it's also, very much like you said, it's these are like the first stages of, this becoming like a very serious scene, and you can see it when like, okay, there's a Cuban place opening. Maybe it's the first, good Cuban place in town, but pretty soon people are going to start taking Cuban food and dicing it up into, okay, now we're focusing in on this Cuban street food. Yeah. We're now there's going to be a Cuban fine dining concept. And so that's how it kind of grows, and so hopefully, a few years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, we'll be seeing this level of success all across the board where the quality of food has gone up, the quality of service has gone up, and the diversity of offerings are there. So where someone can go out and really feel like they're a part of a burgeoning culinary environment, which is great. It's very exciting.
So where do you think post-COVID the restaurant industry is headed? I mean, it's changed a lot over the last year.
Well, that's the $1 million question, isn't it? I feel like if I had a concrete answer to that, the world would be mine. That's the question that's being mulled over in all of these meetings and all these restaurants across the country, right? But to me, the COVID changed everything. It seemed like for the worse at first, but of course, all of these chefs and restaurateurs are some of the most creative and hardworking people out there. And so they took these lemons and they turned it into lemonade. And the big takeaways for me are, to-go food, that's not going away. Takeout food's not going away. Curbside stuff, maybe QR codes was like something, who thought about QR codes since the 90s, or the early 2000s? and now they're everywhere, and there's a lot of benefits to it, I think. And I see these kind of trends happening in the restaurant industry that I'm like, okay, you need to look at it. I think maybe the chefs, restaurateurs who are struggling a little bit might be looking at this as if it's going to go away and turn back into what it was. And I think the really smart ones are looking at it as like, what can we learn from what has been forced upon us?
Right.
Pick the good out of it and keep that moving forward as like a viable dining trend. So to me, like I said, I think creating that safe environment where whoever it is coming in feels good to dine there at all times, and that changes the layout of your dining room and your service model and all of these things. And more of the hands-free stuff, like the QR codes,
Yep.
being able to online order from your phone.
Fewer touch points.
Fewer touch points, speeds things up, and so you can look at the bright side of these things and go, well, man, if I adopt this right off the bat, might be able to make more money than in a conventional restaurant pre-COVID. So those are kind of the trends that we're looking at Tootsie Lou's, and I know you're looking at, with the wash, and we'll see where it goes from here. It's a very interesting moment to be a restaurant owner and operator, because on one hand, there's like a deep existential dread that nothing will ever be the same.
Right.
But also these restaurateurs, these operators, like, we're used to living in a world of unknowns. We're used to like walking into gas being shut off, or cooks no call, no showing, and we're kind of used to this like unknown. So I think if anybody's, suited to adapt to the times, it's the restaurant industry. So yeah, we'll see where it goes from here. It's going to be an interesting ride.
Yeah, I agree. It's been interesting to see just how COVID has impacted Nashville, but also restaurants beyond. I'm almost starting to see this massive divergence between restaurant groups where they're either going smaller or they're going even bigger.
Right.
Right? Like you see some concepts opening in Nashville that are 10,000 square feet. And I look at that and I just go, man, that's a lot of empty seats a lot of the day.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And then we've got, these wash concepts where there's no seating inside, there's covered seating outside, and you have almost 100% efficiency with these units, because even on a rainy day or whatever it may be, so maybe it's snow, you can still continue to pump out to go in delivery. You're not paying rent, overhead, labor to manage 10,000 square feet.
Right.
I mean, what was obviously that's getting more into the numbers and the business side of running a restaurant. And I know for a lot of chefs that there's a fine balance between the culinary creativity and then the business necessity. Where do you kind of fall in that? Are you more on the culinary side, or do you like the business side too?
I love the business side as well, and like I said, full credit to my time at the Tatsia Group in Austin for kind of fleshing that out for me. You kind of have to live in both worlds,
Right.
As an owner, it's just something that you have to do. And as much as I would like to be sequestered in a test kitchen somewhere, just tinkering with food all day, you have to make money at some point. You have to make it profitable. You have to make it viable. And so it's kind of, to me, I always think about it as just taking in that big picture. I always try to take a step back if I get too caught up in a particular dish or in a function of service or, on some financial aspect. It's really just backing away so that you can see everything at once, and then trying to make a clear-headed decision from that. But in regards to the business model and service and these properties, I mean, that was the whole reason that we came out here. And we came out here in October 2019, I believe, and had all these appointments lined up to see all this commercial property, second generation restaurants, because we had to find a place to put Tootsie Lou's. And everything we looked at all these different properties all across Nashville, and it was pretty demoralizing. It was because we were going to do this on a shoestring budget. We were going to do this with as low overhead and as little risk as possible.
Yep.
And that was kind of the only way it was going to work. And a lot of these properties, like you said, were multi-thousand square foot, 5,000 plus square foot properties with, half of that being the dining room. And we knew, because of the climate and everything that was going on, we're like, we're not even going to use the dining room for at least the first year, but I still have to pay for it. So that doesn't make sense. And we just got to this place where we were like, man, it's really tough looking at these second gen properties with these huge dining rooms and huge patios and all this stuff. We needed something slimmer and sleeker to get off the ground and even consider success in the future, you know? And so I remember I just cold called you, just straight the phone number off the website, you know, saw this guy specializes in East Nashville. He's a native. He knows the territory, and a lot of your projects were interesting. You know, you were taking unusual properties on, and that really appealed to me. And I remember talking to you on the phone and just hearing excitement come into your voice when I was describing what we wanted. And then we met at the wash, which was still just a car wash at the time.
It was a ghetto car wash at the time.
And I was a little, you know, we didn't know if we were in the right place or not. We're like standing in this vacant,
it's cold.
really
you pull
beat up.
There's a big dude wearing a big jacket with a beard. Like,
exactly.
Is he supposed to be here?
Right. But, you know, now, over a year later, seeing what the wash has become and what it's slated to be, I mean, I couldn't be more excited to open in this thing. It's, I couldn't really imagine it another way, you know? It's like if you look at, if you're a small startup and you don't have a lot of, just $1 million sitting in the bank to start this thing, which a lot of, certainly chefs don't, you know? And I think that's the thing that really gets me is like, I see all these talented chefs that are working for someone else. They're maybe at the sous level or the exec level, but they're not owners. And so they don't have particularly deep pockets, but they have a lot to give as far as talent, as far as culinary talent. The food that they cook is incredible. And a lot of them won't ever make it out. They won't be able to serve the food that's in their hearts, you know, to guests, because if you're talking about 500, 600K just to even open, that just eliminates a lot of people out the gate, you know?
I think that's the greatest tragedy in the restaurant industry. I mean, how many incredible concepts never came about because a chef couldn't afford the $500,000 to build out a restaurant and then didn't have the credit to sign a 10-year lease. And I mean, there's just so many barriers of entry there.
Totally.
You know, I talked about this with Chad a couple weeks ago. Food truck revolution, right? I mean, that hit Nashville like 10 years ago. But that opened the door to all these really cool concepts in Nashville that may not have otherwise had a chance.
Right.
So it was it's fascinating to see that start to kind of come about. But yeah, I remember that day that y'all called, because y'all right from the get go, y'all were not looking for a typical restaurant, which I thought was really interesting. But it was it's funny because it was not the first time I'd ever gotten that call, especially in COVID. Sure. And yeah, I got super excited because I was like, ooh, I want to test out this concept and see, you know, what an actual restaurant group thinks of it. I talked to Chad about it just to kind of get his thoughts, but you want proof of concept from as many people as possible. So yeah, it's funny, you guys. We went and met on the site. It was just a car, like literally just a car wash. I'm pretty sure a guy pulled up and tried to wash his car while we were there. And like falling apart, didn't look good. And I kind of walked them through like, here's my like silly dream of what we're going to do with this property. And you guys were like, cool, we're in.
Yeah.
I mean, flew back up couple, like what, a month, 2 months later.
Yeah.
And we signed over drinks at Attaboy.
Yeah.
It was like, what a cool experience.
Exactly. Yeah, and it seemed very organic, which was, you know, I maybe a little superstitious, but I always try to follow those signs. Anytime anything falls into place, it's like, all right, let's see this through. But yeah, I mean, the wash is such a unique thing, and it's something that you mentioned the food truck boom. It's so funny looking back on the history of the restaurant business and all the different things that I've done in my career, you know, opened a food truck with Chef Drew, actually, in Austin. And we've kind of touched on all these different angles, and there's pros and cons to all of them, right?
Totally.
And the food truck thing, that boom happened in Austin, you know, 10 years ago. And was great for a second. It birthed a lot of really tremendous concepts, and we got a lot of new food out of that boom. And then people started to realize, okay, well, now we need to find lots. And then all of a sudden there was a
Right.
demand for the lots to park them. And then all of a sudden the city permitting offices that had to inspect and approve all these trucks was backed up for years because 1,000 of them had opened in a month and they just couldn't deal with it. And so
That's crazy.
that boom kind of went like that. But if you're a chef that's trying to start something of your own, there's only a handful of options that you can really look at.
Yeah.
And it's like the traditional route that I expected to take for most of my career was the very old school traditional method. Like, I got to build up my name somehow, not being an owner or even a head chef, And that's like the hardest thing is you work your way through these ranks to maybe get to sous chef or maybe get to an exec position or a CDC position, but you're still not the main name attached to that
Right.
restaurant. There's still always someone above you. So that kind of limits your ability to be known, which you have to be known in order to sell yourself to other people. And if you're lucky enough to have a few people that are interested, that have some money, you have to cook dinner for them and pitch yourself. This is my concept, this is my food, and show that it's viable. And then if you're lucky enough to secure that bag of money, you have to turn around and spend all of it just to get to day one.
Yeah.
You have to build the entire kitchen, and we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars of equipment and, walk-in coolers and hood vents and all of this. And then the dining room, build that out and make that comfortable. And then, well, now in order to even make this thing functional, I have to hire this massive staff and train them and make sure all these bells and whistles are just to get to that day one of grand opening. And even then, you have no idea how you're going to be received. You don't know if it's going to be a success at that point. But now all of a sudden you're $500,000, $600,000, $700,000 in debt to other people. And, having opened these restaurants for other people, doing exactly that, got to the end of it. It was just like, I don't have
No
the stomach
thanks,
for this
man.
anymore. This
Too much.
doesn't seem appealing anymore. It's just to get to that first day. And then you have all the regular stresses of running a kitchen and running a service and hiring and firing people and all of that, controlling all these numbers. But that happens after this massive stress. And now it happens under this cloud of debt that I've accumulated just to make this thing function.
Yeah, and you're operating on what, a 12 to maybe 20% net operating margin.
Totally. It's
And
so narrow.
It's so narrow that you have a bad month, and man, doesn't matter. You got to pay that loan back.
Exactly. And so many of my friends who have gone on to cook great food and open their own restaurants are just saddled with this weight where they're still trying to do the best they can and have excellent service and excellent food, but they know that every bad month adds on to their payoff date, to a place where they can maybe eventually think about becoming profitable. And what's crazy to me is I've seen people adapt to this by kind of just assuming from the start that they're never going to be profitable. And restaurants will live their entire existence
That's
knowing
mind-blowing to me.
it's insane. I mean, if you think about it in pure business terms, it's insane. You're building up something that will fail just so that to create enough waves to move into another project that will hopefully then be successful.
Yeah. We are the Uber of restaurant groups.
Exactly.
We will never be profitable.
People are leveraging their whole, this massive amount of money and time just in the hopes that first failed restaurant, when it closes, will create enough buzz that they can fold everything into a second restaurant. And that, to me, is just insanity. It's not the best way to go about, spending your time or your talent or your money.
No. But I mean, it does. One thing it does say is the passion behind the chef or whoever it is, right? Because knowing that you're not going to make money and you're likely going to lose money in this venture, and you're still willing to take that risk because what you think you have is special enough to take that's pretty powerful.
Sure, definitely.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much. Chef Drew and I talk about this a lot because we both came from fine dining kitchens, and we have probably a pretty permanent affection for fine dining, and just the things that you can do in that environment with that kind of equipment and that kind of staff, you can't do out of a food truck or any other
Yeah.
place.
Can
And
you imagine catbird seat operating out of a food truck?
exactly, yeah. So places like Catbird are incredible, and those meals are magical, and they stick with people, and and that I think will always be there. And for us coming from fine dining, it's just a matter of like how much of this can we take with us into another environment where our success looks different.
Yeah.
And that's where I think places like the Wash and these micro unit restaurants really is special, because you actually can have a storefront. You can have a little bit of yourself in the design and layout of the space. You can elevate your service a little bit beyond just a takeout to go window. It affords you more opportunities to kind of create the environment and the experience that you want to accompany your
Right.
food, without going the full fine dining route, and also being on the other end of the spectrum where you're in a tent with a propane tank or in a truck.
Yeah.
So to me, it kind of hits that sweet spot where it's like, I can do so much more in this micro unit than I could ever think of doing as a pop-up or a takeover or a food truck. But I don't have all of these bells and whistles of like a fully built out brick and mortar fine dining restaurant,
Yeah.
but also don't have any of the cost attached to that. So it's kind of this nice middle ground where it's like, I think we can achieve, with Tootsie Lou's, I think we can achieve a lot of the food that we set out to do without burdening ourselves with this crazy amount of debt or,
Right.
unnecessary bells and whistles.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the more fascinating aspects of the project for me, right? Because I mean, we were talking about this a little bit before, but I don't have a culinary or restaurant background. We just kind of had this cool idea and decided to act on it based on some conversations we had with some restaurant groups we've worked with, and to see those pieces of it kind of fall in place, where it's like, yeah, we don't have to have, we don't have to be dressed to the nines to make this concept work. We can make just as much money, if not more, and have more flexibility and have more control over what we want to like actually present to the customer out of this micro unit. I mean, it's been I had a couple of conversations with some of the other groups that are going in, and I mean, some of them are predicting high six figures to low seven figures a year.
Oh yeah.
Out of 390 square feet, if you include the walk-in cooler.
Right.
I mean, that's wild to me because, I mean, most restaurants, if you're doing it $1.5 to $2 million, you're doing pretty decent.
Yeah.
What do you think is contributing to that? I mean, is it really the indoor seating is not that important? Is it the to-go and delivery piece that is just, it's become so popular that's what's pushing it? Or why do you think that is?
I think it's definitely a confluence of all those factors. Ultimately, I think it's just about efficiency. And if you have the experience and the wherewithal to find a concept that matches the space versus creating one the other way around. And I guess, going back to when my wife and I visited before we had signed on with the Wash, and we looked at all these places that looked great, that it's like affordable price per square foot, and there's already a kitchen in there. There's already a dining room, and the bones are there, and which is really appealing when you walk into a place. You're like, oh, the backsplash is there, the counter, the bar, everything's built.
Yeah, easy.
And you think that it's going to be less money going in, and then when you actually get into the nitty gritty of it and start pulling things apart, you realize, okay, well, this hood vent is 10 years old. I'm going to have to replace it. That's $100,000, 80,000. And maybe this bar doesn't exactly suit our flow of service, so now I have to modify it. And so you're basically paying extra to get someone else's leftover restaurant, but then you're paying that money again to make it your own. And by the time you get to opening, it's like, man, I've kind of built a restaurant twice at this point, just to make it functional for me and my concept. So I think moving the other way around and looking at the 380, 390 square feet of the Wash Bay and saying, okay, what food could I realistically push out of this space? I won't have access to like all the bells and whistles maybe that I'm used to. Like, we're not going to have a smoker or a wood-fired grill, but what food makes sense out of this, which is, tacos, I think makes so much sense to me because I can do it with a plancha. and maybe a fryer. I need two things. And so I think having the creativity to design a concept based around the space rather than the other way around is a great way to start strong. Um, so yeah, I think usage of the space. I mean, some of the places that I've worked in, you're almost more efficient as a cook and a server when the space is limited, rather than having to walk, a couple football fields back and forth to run food, or in a giant kitchen. I've been privileged to work in both huge kitchens and very small kitchens, and sometimes the smaller ones are better because you can just turn around rather than taking steps and things like that.
One of my favorite bars in East Nashville is Attaboy.
Yeah,
Just
definitely.
because those cocktails are, I mean,
Amazing.
they're probably some of the best bartenders in town, hands down.
Absolutely.
And they were very intentional about that. That space was actually probably bigger than what they originally wanted. They wanted something small, intimate, so that when 10 people were in there, it felt full. And you go in there and you feel that and you want to be a part of it, and it's not too overwhelming. When you walk into some of these other concepts that are in town, they're a lot bigger, and you get seated in a section and you're one of two tables. It just feels empty. There
Sure.
might be the same amount of people in that restaurant, but because it's so spread out, it just feels empty and weird, and it almost makes you second guess, like, why isn't anybody here? What's
Right.
going on? But Attaboy, you walk in, it's always crowded. Even if there's only two other people in there, it's crowded,
Yeah.
which I love.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because that's like one of the most interesting intangibles in the restaurant business. That when I was in Austin, Chef Drew and I, we worked for a ramen company, and we noticed I opened 5 restaurants for them, and by the time we opened the second one, we noticed a notable difference in the service between the two restaurants.
Really?
Same exact menu, same food, same, everything. And but service was flowing really different. And so we started crunching the numbers, trying to figure out why it was different. And what we realized is, in the second restaurant, there was a window that showed, it was fast casual. It was like you order at the counter. And so there are people waiting to order. And the second restaurant had a window that showed where you could see the line of people waiting to order from the dining room. And so it created this very subconscious kind of pressure, I think, in the dining room, where people inside felt good because they were at a popular spot, but they could also see the people waiting for the next table, which just sped up their meal by like
Interesting.
a couple minutes. And so we were doing more turns. We were doing more business out of that restaurant.
They were just more conscientious.
Just because of where the window was in relation to the dining room.
Wow.
And so I think that's like an interesting thing, where it's like you were saying with Attaboy, it's like you want it to be intimate but not claustrophobic, but you don't want to make it so big that when it's slow, it feels dead.
Yeah.
Because then people are going to start second guessing why they're there. So those little things, I think, all kind of add up to being able to control your space. If you can pick something that's the right size for the kind of concept that you're trying to do, all of these intangibles, all these positives come with it that you may not even think about. I mean, there's no book on restaurant management or restaurant business would ever tell me to make sure that my line is visible to my dining room,
Right.
But it made a pretty tremendous impact on the sales and on the turn. So all those little things are kind of floating in my head as we look at opening Tootsie Lou's in the Wash. It's like, we want it to be the best it can be, but we want to do it small because small is going to work for us.
Yeah.
It's like we were looking at staffing and things like this coming up on the opening, and like talking about payroll and all these things. And we're like, honestly, our staff can't get that big because there's not enough room for these bodies, which is a great thing, because if somebody can stand here and reach 3 stations, well, then I don't need to pack 3 bodies into 10 feet,
Yeah.
So it kind of works that way on a weird level. There's it's like a bell curve, I feel like, where it's like your efficiency rises to this point based on the size of your kitchen and the size of your dining room. And at a certain point, you get too big, it kind of starts to taper off and you get less efficient. So, hopefully the Wash is kind of that sweet spot.
Yeah.
Right there.
Yeah, I'm excited to be getting feedback from everybody too, once y'all are actually in there and operating, because obviously we're doing multiple locations for this concept. But it's so about efficiency. It's like, how can we just keep fine tuning it and make, the Wash 2.0 is going to be hopefully 10 times better than this one, which I think is already 10 times better than most restaurants, but we're just going to keep continuing to dial that in. I know you guys obviously haven't gotten in and started operating within the space yet, but coming from a larger kitchen and a larger space, moving into something a lot smaller, I mean, how are y'all kind of like strategizing your day to day, your food prep, your operations? I mean, what is that like? How is that different from a traditional restaurant?
Sure. I mean, efficiency is the thing. You just have to keep that in the forefront of your brain at all
Yeah.
time, and think about, you know, when it comes to like a more fast casual concept, uh, volume is kind of the name of the game, and you want to expand your volume as far as you can without breaking other parts of your business model.
Yeah.
So, food quality, temperature of things, with Eastside Pho, I'm sure like temperature of the broth is going to be a huge issue for them.
It's a big deal for them.
And for us, it's our tortillas, we're doing like these
Which
nixtamalized
they're
tortillas.
hand making, by the way.
Exactly. Doing it all from scratch, grinding our own corn. When you do something like that, I mean, the tortilla has an expiration date on it that starts ticking as soon as you start cooking it off. And we want to have the ideal flavor and texture reach our guests by the time they're sitting down to eat it. And so when you're thinking about things on that level, it really sometimes it comes down to seconds where you're analyzing every motion you make, and you're saying, okay, like, why am I reaching over here if I could just be reaching here? And that may not seem like a big deal, but when you add up all those seconds,
When you do it 1,000 times,
maybe it's an hour every service, and that's an hour of paid labor that now I can like completely get rid of from my equation. And thinking about all of those parts. So it's just, it's thinking about max efficiency as far as space and storage, placement of shelves, and like every detail has to be calculated. But ultimately, if you lay it out correctly, and obviously, like you said, once we get in there, I'm sure there will be like a few weeks where we're like moving things around, like, put this shelf in the wrong spot.
Yep.
Time to move it over here. But once you get those things, all those elements really dialed in, your service can really fly, and you can feel the smoothness of it, where it's like, man, we're crushed busy, but this feels easy.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the goal that I always try to shoot for.
Your arms are
service.
blurs, but you're standing still.
Exactly. And you can just push out so much food. You can feed so many people without really breaking a sweat. And that's like, if you can achieve that, why would you not try to? That's the goal always.
No, I think it's something great to strive for. I actually did a very similar exercise earlier this year, just trying to figure out how much I drive every day and how much that ends up like impacting my schedule.
Sure.
An hour a day of driving throughout the year is 4 full business weeks of time. Like it's crazy how 1 hour a day adds up that much.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden at the end of the year, you're talking, that's some real money.
That's a month. What could I do with a whole month of time back?
Exactly.
So I'm like, man, I need to hire a driver and
yeah,
just work in the back.
Exactly.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, Jeremy, what's next for Tootsie Lou's? Are you guys considering franchising? Are you going to do multiple locations? Chad and Gracie, they're adamant now in the point of their career, like we're doing one concept at a time, and they're all going to be different concepts. I mean, do y'all have kind of a 5-year, 10-year plan for Tootsie
Sure.
Lou's?
Yeah, we have a million 5 and 10-year plans right now. And I think, that's kind of the name of the game in the restaurant industry, is like, you have to keep one eye pointed forward and one eye behind you, and
Be able to pivot.
Exactly. So I think, for myself, I have like a pretty short attention span, and as soon as we locked this in and like had the lease signs and had the menu designed, I immediately was like, okay, what's the next thing? What is it?
Start working on it.
And Drew and I would talk about food that we wanted to cook and what those concepts would look like. So there's certainly more in the future from us. At this point, we're trying to stay focused on the present moment, make sure that we get off the ground with quality, because you can never redo those first impressions. We want to make sure that Nashville knows that we have a really quality taco to sell. We want to ingrain ourselves in the community and continue to make friends and promote each other and like be a part of that warmth and that welcomingness that embraced us. We want to pass that on to other people. But certainly there's going to be a lot more in the future. And the times are so wild now. It's like I feel like almost year over year things are changing so drastically. So
Yeah.
at a certain point in the future, it almost becomes counterproductive to plan out that far. So, I think at this point we have too much source material to work through, and it's just going to be a matter of like, all right, now we have this place open, everything's smooth, business is going well. What do we feel like doing next?
Yeah.
What's the next thing? There will never be a shortage of ideas, just a shortage of time and things like that to pull it off. So
I know that problem all too well.
exactly.
Too many ideas, not enough time. Going off on a little bit of a tangent here before we close it out, you guys sent me your pitch deck, the very beginning.
Yeah,
And there were 4 members of the team.
that's true.
And that was what ended up selling me on the concept. I was like, oh man, these guys have the branding down. You tell us about the 4th member of Tootsie Lou's?
Yeah, so the 4th member is Tootsie Lou herself. That's my wife and I, our firstborn dog. And
Firstborn dog.
she's just kind of our spirit animal, I think we were being a little silly when we were writing the concept and figuring out all the bells and whistles. And Tootsie Lou's was just supposed to be our working title.
Yeah.
That was just the thing. It came out of Megan's mouth one day. We were like, that's great. We'll put it down as the working title just so we aren't referring to it as the company or the concept or the thing.
Concept,
yeah. And we'll come up with something better later. And we tried, and everything we came up with kind of sounded a little forced and a little inauthentic, or like we were trying too hard. And kind of came to realize that within Tootsie Lou, there's so much warmth in there.
Yeah.
It's like she's just the most loving creature. She's excited about everybody. She loves to meet everybody. Loves food. Can't keep her away from good food, And she was named after Megan's grandmother, Luann, which has this very like Texas grandma kind of warmth to it that we felt like really embodied the hospitality of the South, specifically Nashville, and this warmth that y'all have going on here. So it just kind of, it hit all these buttons for us, and we were like, it's perfect. That's the name,
Nailed it.
So yeah, Tootsie Lou, we always joke that she's like our chef de cuisine. She has final approval on all the dishes, which will never be a problem because she'll eat anything you put in front of her.
Everything.
But yeah, that's kind of the fun. We wanted to keep that sense of fun, and it's been a real
kind of
joy.
like tongue in cheek, and that's what I loved about it.
Totally. And it's such a joy coming from this world of fine dining that oftentimes tends to take itself a little too seriously.
Yeah.
Sometimes things are a little too sterile and dry. And at the end of the day, it's about making people happy. That's the end goal, is feed as many people as possible, and just create memories and experiences and joy for other people. So it's like, why not name it after the dog? The dogs give, they just manufacture joy.
Love that.
So
Who doesn't love a good, happy, food-eating dog?
exactly.
Taco-eating dog. That's awesome. Well, Jeremy, that's a great note to end it on. If anybody wants to learn more about you or how to find Tootsie Lou's, where should they go?
So we have a website, tootsieloustacos.com. Honestly, right now, as we're getting close to the opening, I think Instagram and social media is kind of the best place. So at Tootsie Lou's is our Instagram handle, and that's a great place to follow and just see updates on the opening and all the pop-ups that we're going to do in the future, and we're going to just keep doing tons of fun stuff, so it should be great.
Love it, man. I'm
Yeah.
excited for you guys. Big year coming in 2022. And that is it for the Commercial Real Estate Investor Podcast for 2021. We will see you guys in the new year. Take care. Thank you for listening to the Commercial Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by Hamilton, your resource for passive real estate investment opportunities. Visit www.investwithhamilton.com to start building your passive real estate portfolio today.